Hello, innovators. I'm Todd Wyant, and welcome to the Bridging the Gap podcast presented by Great Tech Group. You're invited to join our conversation to model the future of construction innovation and the digital transformation adventure of this great industry. My guest today is Susan Young. She's an award-winning CEO, communicator, and keynote speaker in the AEC industry with over 40 years of experience. She works with AEC professionals who want to be clear communicators so that they have more confidence, trust, and impact. For 10 years, Susan was an on-air radio news reporter and anchor. In addition, she co-managed the Office of Radio and TV for New Jersey Governor Todd Whitman. She blends her unique communication background with today's mindset tools that bring new, heartfelt, and repeatable processes and perspectives that few trainers know. Welcome to the show, Susan.
Thank you, Todd. Great to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. So I always like to get kind of your background. How'd you get into this industry? What's your origin story?
Well, yeah, everything's a story for me. So I'll tell you what the story is. When I was 4 years old, I didn't speak, and my parents thought I was deaf. They took me to the doctor, and the doctor said, nope, she's healthy. She just doesn't need to talk. When I was hungry, I would go to the refrigerator. We lived in Brooklyn at the time. I'd bang on the door, and then food would magically appear. So what does a kid like this do? I go to college and I major in mass communication. And I stumbled on the campus radio station the first week and just really fell in love with radio news. I was always interested in writing and news and current events. So graduated, went back to New Jersey, and for 10 years was an on-air radio news reporter and anchor, interviewed everyone from homeless people to presidents, and won a bunch of awards along the way, and also ran Governor Whitman's Office of Radio and TV. And through those experiences, what I found was that I attended hundreds of public hearings and zoning board meetings and protests about. I knew more about groundwater runoff and carcinogens than most people want to know. And so I noticed that the engineers and the construction folks and the architects were pretty awkward with their communication. The eye contact, the slides were packed, they couldn't speak to a crowd and be persuasive. Most of the presentations I saw were painful. A couple were powerful, but not many. And so I decided 25 years ago to start my business and work in the AEC industry for exactly that reason. And that's what I do today. I do a lot of training and keynotes and coaching on communication, confidence, how to be concise and compelling, how to articulate your message, how to be curious, and just like news reporters are, and to tell your story. Todd, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I like it. So I love that passion that got sparked for communication as well too, and part of your journey there. How did that journey really evolve into helping other people become better storytellers and kind of the nuance there?
Well, it's interesting because most people think that they don't have a story to tell, and I've been telling other people's stories for 40 years. As a reporter, I was always, had a microphone in somebody's face, this old school, and just asking for their opinions. And so everyone has a story to tell. But if you believe you don't have a story to tell, you're not going to be able to share your expertise. And like the story that I just shared with you a minute ago, if you got out of bed, you have a story to tell. And so what I do is I teach people how to pull that, we pull that story gently as what I call as an emotional archaeologist. And so I know that people in AEC are more left-brained and analytical and scientific, logical, but we pull in the right side of the brain, which is the emotional and the feelings part, and we blend that together, and out comes that beautiful story that everybody has, but few people recognize.
Yeah. So I love that because I think that that's an issue in the construction industry is also this kind of like humility. That sounds weird to say it's an issue and humility in the same sentence, but there's a humility of like, I don't really want to brag or like I'm just doing my job. I'm going to work every day. I'm building the building, and so they don't think that the story is as cool and impactful because it's not revolutionizing something every single day. But maybe you can speak to some of that of encouragement of there is a really cool story that needs to be told from just doing your job every single day.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like I say, people think they don't have a story to tell, but then when we ask the right questions and we stir that curiosity, and I'll give you a quick example. One of my clients is a civil engineer, and so she insisted she didn't have a story to tell, and she's quite shy and reserved and introverted, and that's what everybody says. And it's like, we can do a personality transplant here and just kind of, make it you a little bit more charismatic and get out of your own way and get out of your own head and that narrative. And so I started to ask her questions through our coaching sessions. And I said, well, how did you get into, how do you major in this in college? And she said, well, I got interested in the environment when I was 14. I went to an Arbor Day parade with my sister in our downtown, and I got really curious and interested in it. And so I went to college and majored in this. And then that's how her story started. Like I talked about when I was 4 years old and I didn't speak. Hers started when she was 14 and went to this goofball Arbor Day parade, as she said, with her sister. And just it really got intriguing. And that's what she majored in college and started her career. So as I say, everybody's got a story, but most of the time you're so involved and entrenched in it because it's your own life that you don't even realize it.
Yeah, that's cool. Finding those kind of unique moments that sets you off on your path. And
it's usually not the defining moments in our lives are usually not the graduations, the birth of our children, or the weddings. It's usually those small little mundane things like going to the parade or banging on the refrigerator for the food that we don't even think of until we say, wait a minute, let's reframe that. And it takes on a life of its own.
yeah. So how do you encourage people then to think through what were those big moments if they happen and we don't even think about them? How do you go back into the story and be like, yeah, this is what set me off on this journey?
That's a great question. And that's what it comes down to is I ask people quality questions. I have insatiable curiosity. And so I ask people the right questions because if you want quality information, you've got to ask quality questions.
Yeah.
And so, as I said, I gently pull it out. It doesn't hurt, but just by asking the right questions in our coaching sessions, that's how it starts to take that form of, okay, so we started here. I don't have to say I was born in Brooklyn in 1962. Well, I don't do the math. I'm 62. Nonetheless, we don't have to start there. You can start when you're 14, but there's usually something that happened that kind of triggers something positive. Like, for instance, a guy was playing with Legos with his grandpa in the basement, building things when he was like 7 years old, and those were his memories. So we went from building this to building that to building your career to building football stadiums at UT in Dallas.
Yeah, very cool. So let's talk to some of the challenges and maybe pitfalls that people fall into when you're trying to become a good communicator. What are some of those kind of unique challenges that are kind of particularly present here in the construction industry?
It's really the internal communication that's in between our ears, that story. We talk about storytelling, but it's the most important communication that you'll ever have is the story that you tell yourself. And the imposter syndrome and the negative self-talk, like I don't have a story, or I'm not worthy, or I wasn't on the radio. You don't have to have been on the radio. You don't have to have been on that path. But as I say, everybody's got a story. So when you don't feel like you are enough or you want to be perfect, then we're all perfectly imperfect. And so the confidence part gets in the way. So when you tell yourself and rewrite that story, because all the memories that we have as adults go back to the times of when we're 0 to 8 years old. When you overheard someone say, oh, you're not good in math, or Joey always plays piano better than you, or somebody bullies you or says something. And that is garbage that we carry around up here that holds us back. But what I teach is the brain science and the self-awareness of how you can overcome that and rewrite your story so that you're not stuck as I'm reserved, I'm shy, I'm an introvert, because you keep telling yourself that. And so we rewrite that narrative for success instead of being stuck.
Yeah, I think that is massive. The story that you tell yourself is how you define yourself, and it's not even necessarily just that. I heard a phrase a while back, and it's stuck with me. It's that I'm not who I think I am. I'm not who you think I am. I am who I think you think I am. And if you follow that train of thought there, it's very important of, the perception's the name of the game, but it's how you are thinking other people are perceiving you that is impacting the story that you're telling in your head too. So how do you get a right perspective on the situation to then kind of start undoing some of that maybe negative story talk that you have been giving yourself?
Yeah, it's a lot of, it's really a journey of self-discovery, and I've been on it for more than 30 years, and not everybody's willing to go there. But if you are willing to go there, and say, you know what, I can really step into my potential and share my gifts and articulate my message clearly and confidently and go into seller doer meetings and talk to the project managers and talk with executives and grow my career and help grow businesses, then we have to get unstuck. And it starts again first in our head to rewire. And that's the brain science part of getting unstuck and knowing that you have these patterns and routines and how to overcome them.
Yeah. So I want to pick up on something that you said a couple of minutes ago about you brought up it feeling like an imposter. And I think that that's a very prevalent feeling for most people, just in general of, when you get a new responsibility, you're like, I don't know what I'm doing yet. You're kind of figuring out as you go, and that imposter feeling creeps in. How do you counteract that as well too?
What we have to do is lower the voice on that imposter syndrome and raise the voice on, I know exactly what to do. And if I don't, I have all the resources at my fingertips. I have people, I have the internet, I have experiences. We all have the resources. The question is, are we being resourceful?
Yeah.
So that's what it comes down.
Yeah. The other thing that comes in on that resourcefulness is being able to admit, I don't know this. Can you come and help me? And having that kind of humility to own where you might be struggling or where some weaknesses are.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's exactly what happened with when I worked for Governor Whitman in New Jersey. She, she knew everything. People would come up to her, the press would be like, hammering her with what happened with the taxes? What about the landfill? Did you hear about the plane crash? All of this, what about the abortion issue? And just all these things like bang, bang, bang. And she could fire off answers like nobody's business, right? And people would say to her something, the reporters would ask her a question and she said, I don't know, but I'll find out. And then she would turn to her aide and say, Jason, make a note of this and we'll get back to them in an hour. And then she actually did it. And the press was standing there with their mouths hanging open. The reporters were like, nobody's ever said they don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, nobody expects us to know everything.
Right.
But when you follow through and say, I'll get back to you in an hour, and you actually do it, that's where we gain that trust. We start to trust ourselves and say, I don't have to know everything because nobody knows everything, but I can learn and find out.
Yeah, I think that's massive. So let's kind of shift from the story that we're telling ourselves to how we are presenting ourselves. So we're talking kind of zeroing in on the tone, clarity, and delivery. What does sprucing up a communication style, what does that really look like in an industry that is thriving on brevity and just getting things done?
Yeah, it's really important because, we're 25 years into this century and the construction, architects, engineering, we're so far behind. And when we really need buy-in from leadership saying, let's go, as I teach, let's go past, Toastmasters or active listening or personality assessments and get to the meat of what this really is, getting, clients who are getting, generating business and feeling like they are contributing to the bottom line. That's what it's all about. So, we can't keep sweeping it under the rug because there is no rug. And so we talk about AI, we talk about ChatGPT and all of the technology, but I'm talking about what I call the human factor, human to human communication. To pick up the phone and say, hey, we don't need 17 threads of emails or texts. Just answer the question, tell me what this is, or let me clarify this. And it takes 20 seconds. But when we have our noses in the phone and, I always say a cold keyboard will never replace a warm handshake. So we can have all the technology, but we've got to articulate and be clear and compelling and really be able to break complex data and information down to one or two sentences. And so that's what I teach people is, and it goes back to radio is, there were stories that I would come back to the radio station from a press conference and write 6 sentences with a quick soundbite of 12 seconds from the governor or the mayor, or whoever. And then the newspaper would come out the next day and the reporter was at the same event I was at. And the banner on the front of the newspaper read this. And then there was an article that said continued on page 12. I'm like, I was at the same event And I was able to break this down into 6 sentences. And now you're talking about the story of who the neighbor was and what color pants they were wearing and how they went to third grade and blah, blah, blah. So what's relevant? And this really sparks our critical thinking in AEC. What do people have to know, and how can we articulate that message in a clear, concise, easy to understand way?
Yeah. Boiling it down to what's relevance. I'm assuming that there's a big generation divide, as the millennial representative here. How does that factor into it? That, I look at even Gen Z now and it's like, well, millennials, we struggle talking face to face, and we go much more digital as our first language. Gen Z's even worse with that, of being able to look somebody in the eye and have a conversation at that. How do you go about that generational divide that's coming in?
Well, it's interesting, Todd, because all the research shows that, especially one report that I just saw, that 70% of Gen Z, they want to learn. They want the training. They really want to, tuition reimbursement, and they want these current programs, not the ones from 2019, but they want the current. They're hungry for information, and a lot of firms are not providing it at the level. And so that ties into the talent shortage. And how do we retain and acquire talent? So when we teach them and they want to learn, I mean, they went through COVID, so they don't know the networking skills. They don't have the eye contact. They don't know the small talk, but they want to learn it. And so firms need to be able to provide that higher level training so that they can become competent and important players and part of that team. We did a program recently with about 50 students who were on there that had 0 to 2 years of experience, and they had no idea what the expectations were from their managers. Every single day they didn't know the 20,000-foot view of what the firm was, and then break it down into the 2,000-foot view of what they're supposed to be doing every day. They didn't know what their role was in the big picture, and they never told anybody. So how do you function like that in a successful business? How do you capture pursuits when there's a huge communication breakdown?
Right. Yeah, what I hear is just a domino effect that is happening there. That if the top of the leadership chain isn't communicating the why behind the what, then that just is a cascading negative effect. That when you get to the those people that are early in their career, they have no idea, and they don't even know what they don't know, so they don't know how to have that humility that we were talking about to ask somebody for help, because it's just they are assuming that that's just normal. They're like, well, okay, well, this is what we do, I guess.
Well, there's an author named Louise Hay who was really big in the professional development arena for decades. And she said, if you want to clean your house, you have to look at the dirt. And so when we talk about the egos and leadership checking their ego at the door and saying, you don't know this either. And so how are you going to develop and have that succession plan with your younger generations in the workplace if you're not communicating it effectively either? So check your ego at the door, and let's all start to learn, because as I said a few minutes ago, we can try to sweep it under the rug, like mental health and suicide and all of these, drug addictions, all these major issues. But in the end, there is no rug. We have to have these difficult conversations.
Yeah. Amen. 100% on that. Shifting a bit from the verbal conversation to, we all know that most of what is communicated is nonverbal in the body language that you're reading off of. How do you go about kind of prepping people with that knowledge of reading those nonverbal communication cues to be more aware when they're presenting to a crowd to get that engagement?
It's really about noticing the subtle nuances about people, and it's higher level communication. As I said, it's not about talking, repeating people's names and active listening, but it's a practice called silent listening. And the word silent and the word listen is an anagram. It's the same letters in a different order. So when you silence your mind and you're fully present and you're not distracted with, oh, I forgot to get the FedEx package out, or I have to get gas in the car, but you're fully present. And one of my coaches told me years ago, wherever my feet are, my head is. And so I'm here with you on this podcast. I'm not worried about the gas in the car or the package. And so when we're fully present and we pay attention, And we know how we move and behave and how you have to have, I'll give you a couple of examples here, a little cheat sheet. Open palms are inviting and welcoming. You make eye contact. You know how to stand up straight and you keep your jacket open, unbuttoned, because if it's buttoned, it looks like you're hiding something. People who have their profile photos on LinkedIn, for instance, if they have their smile and their lips are closed and you're not showing your teeth, it's like you're hiding something. Now, some people say, I don't like my teeth, or that's just the way I smile, but that's how subliminally it comes across. Noticing things like that and being able to course correct and say, okay, like, as I said, I worked in radio. So vocal vitality is part of it too, where you speed up and then you slow down and you capture people's attention. So they're mesmerized, they're hanging on every word, like the gospel is dripping off your tongue like this. Okay. So you get people's attention, you lower your voice, you raise, you speak, you speed up, you slow down, and you engage them at a different level.
Yeah. So I think your radio background is really fascinating for where my brain goes next. Okay. So in a post-COVID world, obviously people are doing a lot more of what we're doing right now, that we're not in the same room. We're looking at each other through Teams and we're just staring at our computer screen and the other faces there. How does that change how people are interpreting the nonverbal cues and the body language when you only see, a tiny little section of the human body and you're not seeing the full kind of context of what's happening?
Yeah, and that's the big thing with COVID, obviously with technology. Now we're just, as we used to call it, talking heads, because
Right.
you're only from the shoulders up. And so how do you use and gesture, and how are you sitting, and what are your facial expressions? That's all the nonverbal communication that we need to play up. But it is a challenge for sure, and that's why it's so important to be able to go to in-person conferences and to meet people and again shake their hand and make that eye contact, because this doesn't work 24/7. We're missing a huge part of our communication. For instance, when you're doing a presentation, and I do a lot of keynote speaking and trainings, don't hide behind the podium, because the podium is like the safe space, but you're blocking your whole body, so you're not communicating effectively by going out there and really saying, okay, here's my gestures and here's how I move and here's how I stand and the posture, and you're pointing here and you're doing this and you're telling a story. So hiding behind the podium, just as we're hiding out here on camera, and just the headshot there, takes away from the full effect of our communication.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. I think there's a point too. I figured this out with this podcast of listening to yourself back and watching yourself. It's a very humbling experience for sure. But it's really tell, because everybody has certain tics and quirks that they do. Like I'm very expressive with my eyebrows, so I have to like tell myself, don't keep moving my eyebrows all the time, because it gets distracting and annoying. So, you have to see what is in it for you. I talk a lot with my hands, so I try to keep it all down below the camera when we're on a situation like this, because it's super distracting when my hand starts flying around. So I think being able to be in tune with yourself and watching yourself back and being like, what do I find kind of annoying about the tics that I'm doing, and just be aware of that. I think awareness is a huge first step.
Well, yeah, and I'll share two quick things with you, Todd. One is that, again, I was on the radio, so I didn't need gestures. All I had was my voice. We didn't do on camera things back when I was, in the beginning of my career. So I didn't know when I went on stage, to speak, that how to move and gestures. All I had was my blustery voice, and so I had to learn the gestures and the body language part of it. And then the second point is that when I would record, if there was a message, for instance, you record on an answering machine. Do you want to re-record your message or hear it back? I was mortified. I'm like, I was on the radio for 10 years and I can't stand the way I sound. I'm like, I got to re-record this message for the doctor, a message for my friend. We're super hard on ourselves is, I think, the bottom line. And so we give ourselves some grace and some space to learn and to grow. I think that's important.
Yeah. What are some kind of common body language mistakes that most people make that they should be aware of how to kind of overcome that when they're presenting or talking. It doesn't necessarily have to be at a big keynote, but just when they're having a conversation and interacting with people.
Yeah, I think one of the things is they point. And you don't want to point because that's like third grade teacher, like, where's your homework? So you can go like this with your fingers to make a point to kind of hit it home. Again, keeping your jacket open and not like you're hiding something, palms open so you're inviting, not clenched fists. If you wear glasses, a lot of people will, instead of taking their reading glasses, they'll look down their nose, but it looks like you're looking down on people. Mm-hmm. So take the glass, even though you keep putting them on and taking them off, like my husband wears reading glasses. So instead of doing that 100 times every 10 minutes, he just leaves them on, but he's looking down his nose, and that looks like you're, again, looking down on people, which is subconscious.
Right. Yeah. No, makes sense. Do you have a favorite story or example? You've given some already of where great storytelling really changed the outcome of a project or the business deal that they were going on.
Yes. In fact, it's funny. One of my coaching clients did this, and we, like I mentioned earlier, we pulled the story out of her. She was going to she's an engineer. She was going to a seller doer meeting and was really nervous. And she started to tell me about it was her 60th birthday a few weeks before this. And she was in Texas. So she starts to tell me about how she had planned this big celebration with a few special friends, and they were supposed to go out on the lake. And the day of her birthday of this outing, the weather was bad. And so they called up the person who was running the boat, and they said, well, we can't go. And she was like, oh, no, I'm going. And they said, well, no, you're not, and she says, I'm going. And they said, well, you know what, if we don't go on the lake, we can go through this other area. And she says, okay, so I'll gather up my friends. And so they go on the boat, and she's very happy, and they're waiting on her hand and foot because it's her big birthday celebration. And if she's hungry, they bring her a sandwich. If she's thirsty, they bring her a bottle of water. If she's chilly, they bring her a jacket. So everything's going just wonderfully well. She's super happy. And she tells this story at this presentation. And she says, but she did her homework before. And one of the words that kept popping up on the website was the word exceptional. So she's telling the story about her birthday, and she didn't understand when we were working together, why would they want to hear about her 60th birthday? What does this have to do with engineering and the project that we're bidding on? Mm-hmm. And so she starts to tell the story. She said, I wanted an exceptional birthday, and I wasn't going to let the weather interfere with it. So we work around the problems. We go out on the boat, have a wonderful day, an exceptional day. And now she circles back to, as I taught her in this technique, how about you? I know that you want and deliver exceptional projects, and you want exceptional service. We don't have cost overruns like our competition because of bang, bang, bang. Mm-hmm. And she shares the story, and she says, we provide exceptional service. Isn't that what you want? The room burst into applause. People clapped for her after she told her story in just that way, with the water, and she was cold, and they brought her a drink and a jacket, and she had all the right pacing and the vocal vitality and the body language. When people applauded, she said she teared up. She's like, people don't applaud in seller doer meetings, but that's what happened.
Yeah, it's a relatability factor.
Exactly. Memorable and relatable.
Yeah, I like it. What's your favorite communication tip that most people don't think about?
They don't think about the other person. They talk about themselves. And so what we focus on is what I'm from Brooklyn, so I know a lot of 4-letter words. And the one, not the vulgar ones you're thinking of, but the F word is flip. Flip your communication. It's not about you. It's always about your prospect or your client and how you can be of service. How can I help you? What is, let me dig away as, say, an emotional archaeologist. I bring my invisible shovel, and I'm going to be curious and ask you good questions. I've done my homework. I know my audience. I know who I'm speaking to and what the challenges are. And so when you do that, you're not just another vendor or a subcontractor, but now you're a trusted advisor because your respectability is up here.
Yeah, that curiosity, that's huge. For sure. So as we start to land the plane, a couple kind of rapid fire questions for you. What is the phrase modeling the future? What does that mean and look like to you?
Modeling the future takes me back. Even though it's the future, we still go back to human communication, which is thousands of years old, and it's timeless. So we can model the future and talk about the tech and all of that. But in the end, we're still human to human communication, the human factor. We weren't born construction engineers or project managers or engineers or architects. We were born little tiny babies, human beings. And that's what we have to keep in mind as we move.
I like it. What does innovation mean to you?
It means having an open mind and an open heart and being willing to try something new. The two most dangerous words are I know, because that means you're shut down, that you have a closed mind and a closed heart, that you know, end of story. Let's say, that sounds interesting. Tell me more. That's the curiosity factor.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we talk a lot on the show on one of the most annoying phrases in construction is, well, that's just the way we've always done it. We don't need to change it. You're like, that's such a killer. Don't say that.
Exactly.
So how do people find out more information and connect with you?
Yeah, we do trainings online and as I say, keynote speeches and a lot of online courses. It's aecamplify.com. That's the website, and everything is there. Reach out, aecamplify.com.
Awesome. We'll put that in the show notes as well, too, that people can find that easy. So final question for you, Susan, if I could give you all construction power, you could snap your fingers and innovate one thing in the industry, what would you pick to innovate?
We have just finished developing this data management framework, because data is all over the place and CRMs, and it's just old and people are scrambling for the current up to date. And so we have a system now that we created that is going to stop all of this data and from piling up and being lost in files and outdated information. So this data framework is asking certain questions in an easy, simple way, a 7-step process, so that everyone is on the same page, so that there's no confusion, there's there's fewer cost overruns, there's no misunderstandings. It's crystal clear because everybody has it documented and we have clean data to work with and move things forward.
That's massive. That's a whole other podcast topic right there, is just on the data management for sure. That's
an
amazing thing to see.
We're super excited about this framework. So something to look for.
Very cool. Well, thanks so much for taking the time and helping us unpack the story within us and how to communicate that better.
Thank you, Todd. Appreciate the opportunity.
And now it's time for my Todd takes from this episode. First take, everyone has a story, even if you don't think so. Most people in the construction industry downplay their own stories, believing that everyday work isn't worth sharing. But the truth is, if you got out of bed today, you have a story. The challenge is recognizing those small but meaningful moments, like attending a parade or building with Legos as a kid, that shaped who you are and why you do what you do. Storytelling starts with acknowledging the value of your own experience. Second take, curiosity is a superpower. Being a great communicator starts with having a natural curiosity, not just about others, but about yourself too. Asking the right questions, internally and externally, can uncover powerful insights and help shift internal narratives. Whether it's connecting with clients or developing your own career path, curiosity leads to clarity, confidence, and better human-to-human connection. And finally, if you want to clean your house, you have to look at the dirt. I love that phrase. Self-awareness is the starting point for growth. From leadership to frontline workers, communication struggles often stem from unexamined habits, fear, or ego. True innovation, especially in communication, requires the willingness to reflect honestly, challenge internal dialogue, and break outdated patterns. Avoiding the dirt only allows dysfunction to fester. Growth begins with a willingness to face it head on.